Good morning and welcome to the Sussex Strategy Group Municipal Election Show. My name is Jamie Besner. I'm the lead here at Sussex of the Municipal Practice Group. Sussex Strategy Group, as you may know, is a government affairs and strategic communications firm located in Toronto. We do work at all three levels of government, municipal, federal, and provincial across the country, and we have offices in Toronto and in Ottawa. So we thought it would be interesting today to talk about the City of Toronto election and all the changes that have happened as a result of the reduction in wards. Council has gone from 44 wards to 25 wards, and the election is coming up. And we thought it'd be interesting to talk about that, changes that occurred, the mayoralty race, and some other interesting things that are going on. This morning, I'm really pleased to be joined by Lorne, Bozinoff, the president of Forum Research, longtime friend and client, and a man who knows a lot about city politics and polling and research, and will give some insights on this election. Thanks, Lorne, for joining me this morning on the show and talking about this interesting election. Big changes at the city?
Absolutely. So, of course, you know, we're in the middle of the election campaign now. It did kick off kind of slowly, especially with the boundary issue, but that's all been settled. People are starting to get into gear. I think people are starting to pay more attention. I think there was so much attention paid to what Doug Ford was going to do and what was going to happen with the boundaries and the notwithstanding clause and all that. There wasn't as much attention on the simple horse race, who's ahead, why are they ahead, and that type of stuff, but now we're into the actual horse race.
Great. So let's talk about, start off to talk a little bit about issues and, you know, what are people thinking about the election and what are the main sort of themes that you're hearing perhaps in your research. You've been out in the field, primarily, I guess, around the mayoralty campaign. But you will go back out, so perhaps we'll get you in another time after you get into the ward by ward races. But let's start off and focus on the mayoralty, the race. So what are the main issues that you're hearing? Well,
let's just look at the background first of all. We do monthly tracking of the political situation in the City of Toronto, and John Tory has had a phenomenal approval rating for the past 4 years. He's currently in the 54–56% range, which is huge. It may not sound huge, but in politics, that's a huge number. In contrast, Kathleen Wynne near the end was down to a 17% approval rating. So he's really has been on a roll for these last 4 years. I think because he may not be the most flamboyant person, but he seems to be getting the job done, and people are really appreciating that. So that's going to make him hard to beat no matter who runs against him.
Right.
So that was sort of the lead up to the campaign. Tough position in terms of trying to beat him. So Keesmaat did jump in. She made big news when she did that, of course, because it was very unexpected. And she got an instant, I'll say, bounce of about 30% in the polls right off the bat. Like she announced one day, a day later we do a poll, and she's at 30%. So it was a good start for her. And then, of course, the other third-party candidates have been coming along, right, and they make the balance of the votes. So in terms of the public opinion polling, John Tory's got that 50%, 52, 55% now. Keesmaat's got about 30%. The remainder go to those other candidates. And I guess the issue is going to be, can Keesmaat close the gap? Go from that 30% to 55%. It's a huge gap. And really, when you think of it, she's got to sort of gain a point a day. She can't, like, be flat. She's got to start to build. That build has not occurred yet. She is still at 30%, and she needs to close that gap. And it will become harder and harder because the gap stays the same, but she has less and less time to close the gap.
Right. So she's obviously out there talking about issues, trying to pick something that's going to catch fire in the public eye and perhaps interest people to join her campaign or vote for her or support her. But the issues around the campaign seem to be sort of the same issues that we hear a lot about. But I think there's some noticeably absent things that they're not talking about. You know, in previous elections, when I know when you did polling on municipal elections, particularly crime and taxes were always the #1 and #2 issues. We don't hear a lot about taxes. We don't hear a lot about government spending. You know, in the last provincial campaign, it was all about that. Doesn't seem to be resonating, or they don't seem to be talking about that in this municipal campaign. Is there a reason for that? Is it you know, is it just something that people don't care about, or is it just not something that's sexy?
You know, I think people have kind of moved on from the tax issue at the local level. I know it's a big deal provincially, but the #1 issue really is a broad issue called affordability. And primarily just in terms of ticket items, that's housing, so that's rent costs, rental and so forth, and real estate. Those two components of the housing thing are a big part of the affordability issue. They are on the minds of people, and they are very, very difficult issues to tackle and actually deal with.
Right.
And that will be the challenge, both to Keesmaat as she prosecutes the case against John Tory, and again in terms of John Tory defending his 4 years, what's been done in terms of the rent and housing price issues.
So let's get back to the John Tory stability. He's seen as a good manager, I'm sure. You know, a big contrast from the previous administration, obviously, and the turmoil that occurred under Rob Ford, and people wanted that, and they looked for that. And so do you think that obviously he's presented that his numbers show that people agree with his job performance and think he's doing a good job? Part of that obviously is stability and calmness. I mean, that must be one of the reasons that voters want that. Do you think that's something that Keesmaat can even tap into? Can she assault? You know, can she go after that? How do you make that case that he's not doing a good job when so many people are?
Yeah, she really does have to prosecute the case in the court of public opinion.
Right.
If she wants to start scoring some points against John Tory, she's got to really take the battle to him, and she's got to come up, I think, with some realistic alternatives rather than you know, pie in the sky type of stuff. And a good example is transit. So transit's another issue, but I'm not sure after we've had years and years of planning for transit lines, subway lines or whatever, with nothing being built, that anyone is credible on that. So everyone talks about the downtown relief line, right. But is it more than just a line on a map that will never get built? And I think
there's a lot of those.
There's a lot of those, and I think that's you know, that could be Achilles' heel for John Tory, because he certainly hasn't got a shovel in the ground.
And he ran on that the last time.
That's right. So he hasn't got a shovel in the ground. And can she prove that she could actually get a shovel in the ground on that issue? Otherwise, it is just two lines on a map, and what's the difference between the two candidates?
Do you think people find her credible in terms, I mean, she was the city's chief planner. I mean, she wasn't there for that long, but obviously she made a name for herself, and people see her out and about, and she spoke, when she was the chief planner, she was probably far more visible than previous chief planners, and she was out in the media and social media all the time. And do you think that people think that she's credible in that way? Like, can she come across as someone who can deliver these things, these big projects, more so than the mayor?
Well, I think it's a two-edged sword. Yes, she could be, because she was the chief planner, but yes, she was the chief planner. Nothing got built. So I'm not sure what the argument would be that she would make. Like, well, can she say, you know, she is going to criticize John Tory about some transit issues, but where was she? She was the planner at the time. Right. So, you know, could boomerang on her. So maybe more complicated than you would think. But she does have to start scoring points against John Tory on these issues.
And you're saying a point a day. I mean, that's a big number to try to pick up.
That's right.
Now, is that 30%, I mean, she's at 30-odd%, is that 30% just the people who aren't interested in voting for John Tory? Isn't that the natural base of vote that, you know, whether it was Olivia Chow or whether it's Jennifer Keesmaat or enter, you know, candidate name here, is that not just that base that will never vote for John Tory?
In some ways, yes. So this is the left, and so it's centered in the old city of Toronto.
Right.
And interestingly, you know, the race is not competitive citywide, but the race is extremely competitive in the old city of Toronto.
So I think we have a map here that we can show. So we're talking about, when you talk about the old city of Toronto, realistically we're talking about this area here, and that kind of comes around and goes there, and that's kind of the old city of Toronto. So you're saying it's actually competitive in those wards between her and John Tory?
Absolutely. It's like 49 John Tory, 38 for Keesmaat.
Wow.
Maybe a 10-point difference. So this could really, this would be close. If it were just the old city of Toronto, this would be very close.
Interesting. And so, I mean, I think back to previous elections, you know, the first amalgamated election, Mel Lastman versus Barbara Hall. Mel Lastman, you know, took this suburban vote, and Barbara Hall took that sort of downtown old city of Toronto vote. And frankly, I think Rob Ford was very similar, but perhaps, you know, he had Scarborough, Etobicoke, and North York versus George Smitherman, who took the downtown wards. So John Tory and her are splitting this downtown. How is he doing in Etobicoke or North York?
He does very well in the suburbs. And I think that's something for Keesmaat to think about. You know, does she have a downtown vibe? Because the people in the suburbs don't like that. The suburbs do not like everything being controlled by people downtown. They do not like that. So I think John Tory's done well to mitigate that, and you know, with the executive committee and all that. I'm not sure that Keesmaat is really resonating in the suburb. I'll say the inner suburbs. And that's something that she really has to address, because the gap is even larger between her and Tory in the suburbs.
And what would that gap be? You've done some sort of citywide polling. Where would the numbers be in, let's say, Etobicoke?
So in Etobicoke would be like 65 John Tory, 21 Keesmaat.
Wow.
These are huge, huge differences. You know, in this city, where you live is who you are. Like, if you're a suburbanite, you know, I know these are the inner suburbs. In these inner suburbs, it's a certain political viewpoints versus the downtown area, which is much more left.
There's always been that urban-suburban split on city council since amalgamation, frankly. There's lots of people that you know, you live in the suburbs, I live in the suburbs, and people still identify as Etobicoke. Where I am in the West End, people they say they're from Scarborough or from North York. You know, they still identify that, and that's strong. And you know, when the politics of it kind of factors in, like I think you said it, you're absolutely right. The voter, what they're looking for, the services that they're looking for are frankly different than perhaps downtown.
It's a different urban landscape. It's really a different city in the suburbs. And then I should point out, Scarborough is a special case now because of the Scarborough subway. The situation going on with getting that subway actually built, and it's been talked about for so long. And Keesmaat's had different views than John Tory about that subway. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the vote in Scarborough. And John Tory's approval ratings are a little bit down in Scarborough because there hasn't been a clear way forward, I believe, on the Scarborough subway for so far. So a little bit of a weakness there, but I'm not sure that Keesmaat has an alternative to his.
What do the numbers look like in Scarborough right now?
In Scarborough, John Tory's at 52%. Keesmaat's actually at 37%. Pretty good for her. So, you know, she has been criticizing the planning of that subway, and I think she's advocating more of an LRT approach, and maybe that is popular with some voters in Scarborough.
We heard a lot about that during that debate, you know, whether they should go back to the drawing board and replan this. The mayor insisted that he didn't want to. He wanted to get a shovel in the ground, although that hasn't happened yet. You know, now we have a new provincial government. Doug Ford, we know, is the subway advocate. I wonder if that's going to have some kind of a trickle effect into this voting in Scarborough and how they perceive it, if they think that there's a real possibility perhaps of undoing the plan and starting over and either building a subway, or if Jennifer Keesmaat gets elected, as you said, building an LRT. Is there credibility there, you know, on that issue? There's a gap, but it's not as big as some of the other gaps.
And actually, the Ford position, I think, is to build a 3-station subway extension, not a 1-station. And with 1 station, it may actually be slower for people because of the distance to get to the station compared to an LRT solution. Mm-hmm. But with a 3 stations approach, the subway may be a lot more convenient for a lot more people. It may actually boost the John Tory's standing in Scarborough if it becomes well publicized.
Mm-hmm. And so transit obviously is a big issue across the city. Everybody has different ideas of what they want in terms of transit. Everybody realizes that congestion and traffic and transit are all sort of tied hand in hand. And as you talked about affordability, affordable housing and rent affordability. Are there any other issues that are sort of citywide that people are resonating in this election?
Well, we haven't asked about it, but violent crime has to be out there.
For sure.
Because whenever there's an event and it's a visually strong event, it does affect public opinion. Mm-hmm. So a violent crime where there's guns and people getting killed, the visual imagery of that does move public opinion. So it is out there. No one's really addressed it. So no one's taken advantage of it. It may be hard for Keesmaat because she's running as a center-left person. What's she going to say about crime? Like, does she have a solution to
right.
about the crime rate? Right. A little bit harder for her, I think, to articulate that from the left, because she would be talking about the root causes of crime, right? Which is not instant solution.
As opposed to being solid on or pro-police or increasing police officers on the street, which is typically sort of the center-right position, which you hear more so from those conservative politicians.
That's exactly right.
So is crime treated or seen differently in different parts of the city? Does it poll differently in different parts of the city?
Yeah, we haven't looked at it lately, but I think it would, because it's very, very location specific. Okay. People get an idea, oh yeah, there's a lot of crime in that neighborhood. Is that my neighborhood?
Right.
So, or is it someone else's neighborhood?
Right.
But the closer to home, obviously, the more concerned people become about it. So it has the potential of being an issue. I just don't know how the candidates can leverage off of this. Now, I think the one unlucky thing for Jennifer Keesmaat is there's no one running on the right. Mm-hmm. It's very, very hard for someone on the left to win without someone on the right also running.
Splitting the vote, is that what you're saying?
Splitting the vote. This city is really center left, center, and center right. So without the three mm-hmm. running, mm-hmm. So we famously we had that when Rob Ford won. There were three candidates, so it was split, and it was exactly what I'm talking about. With only two candidates, and so John Tory's really, he's there in the center. He's just got the Liberals, he's got the Tories, he's just there in the center. Very, very difficult for one single candidate to take him on. They kind of need to be a competitive race, you really need three candidates. You do need someone on the right to draw support away from John Tory, the person in the center. And the Fords know this. Doug Ford knows this, and Rob Ford knew that. Doug Ford in the last election, he needed Olivia Chow do well. Right. If she didn't do well, right. She was not pulling votes from the center, and he was going to lose. Right. That's exactly what happened. So now the shoe's on the other foot. Keesmaat hasn't got sort of that someone on the right to draw some support away. And I think there was some idea maybe someone might be running on the right. That never occurred in the end. And maybe they would have run if they had known Keesmaat was running.
Right, interesting.
So anyways, so now we only have the two major candidates instead of three major candidates. There's no real splitting of that center right and center vote. It's a big block, and it's going to be hard for Keesmaat to overcome that. The other thing is she can't get blown too far to the left. The only place to grow, there's no one really to the left of her. There's John Tory's to the right of her. So there's not a major candidate to the left of her. She has to get to the center, mm-hmm. maybe center left still, but she has to get to the center to really move her campaign forward, I think.
But the risk of that, I would presume, is alienating that sort of solid, perhaps NDP downtown left vote. If you move too much to the center, you start to lose vote on the far left, and they seem to be coalescing. My understanding is that perhaps the unions are supporting her, and as you say, she's very competitive in those old City of Toronto downtown wards, which we're seeing are represented typically by NDP and left-leaning councillors. So how far to the center can you go without to compete with John Tory without alienating your base?
But where's the base going to go? There is nowhere to go. There's just, there's a myriad of other candidates, there's the dozens of them.
Right.
So of course it could go somewhere, but realistically, I think, the people on the left have to think, wow, do we want John Tory for another 4 years? Because that's the way this thing is heading right now.
Right. Interesting. And there's nobody, the polling, this is a two-way race. I mean, there's no third candidate. There's all, probably 20 odd candidates running for mayor. It's probably more than that. I haven't looked at the number exactly recently, but will they make, what's the percentage of those that don't vote for John Tory or Jennifer Keesmaat? Is it significant? Is it?
Or are those people even going to vote?
Or will those people vote? That's
I
interesting.
mean, let's face it, they're not happy with either two major candidates. So they say they're going to vote for someone who has a very, very remote chance of winning. So are they even going on election day? The hardest thing to predict in polling is those other candidates.
Right.
Because people are going to vote for I'll say the mainstream candidates. Mm-hmm. People know who they are. The brands are pretty established. There's some connections to the political parties or whatever. The other candidates are just sort of there in the ether. And it's very hard to predict what's going to happen with them. And if the polls aren't completely accurate, it'll probably be with these other candidates and what happened with them. Typically one or two do kind of break out. They do kind of get above the others, but they're still only about 5%.
Right.
They're not going to break out and get 10% or 20% of the vote. So it's a little hard to predict what the vote will be with the other candidates.
Let's talk a little bit about that. The fact that you have two candidates. You have a mayor and incumbent mayor polling very high in terms of popularity. There's this base of vote that the other candidate is getting, Jennifer Keesmaat in this case, 30-odd%. Does that help turnout? Does it hurt turnout? Does it matter, frankly?
The theory says it's bad for turnout because people are going to think, what's the point in voting? It's already a done deal.
Interesting.
So I think though, so we're really in the heat of the campaign now. This is really now the critical time. There were a lot of distractions with the provincial stuff and the boundaries and all that. So now we're really into the race. And Keesmaat does have the opportunity of coming up with new ideas, bring things forward. So she came forward with the ideas about the golf courses today or yesterday.
That's
or whatever.
Right, yes.
So she can come up with those.
Gardner Expressway.
The Gardner Expressway and what to do with the eastern part of it. So she's the one coming up with the ideas. So she has to now come up with some ideas that really start to resonate with people. That this is her opportunity. John Tory, he should be on the defensive. He's the incumbent 4 years, so he has a long record now.
Right.
And she's the one that has to come up, I think, with the new ideas, and that will be her. I think that's her key to winning this. Mm-hmm. Can she come up with some creative ideas, and whether you agree with these ideas or not, they were fairly creative. This golf course thing, it's a creative idea. The Gardner was discussed and it was rejected in the end, her idea, but it's an idea and she's brought it back. Right. And it did have a lot of, it was a close council vote about the Gardner a couple of years ago when they voted on it. So it was resonating with a lot of people a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. So she's
it's that wedge issue that you're saying that she's looking for, something that's going to separate her from him.
Yeah, she has to differentiate herself.
That's interesting. I mean, we know that John Tory, the last time he ran, sorry, not the last time he got elected, the first time he ran, it was the Island Airport was the defining issue in that election that separated him and David Miller at the time, and David Miller got elected from, I think he was polling fourth at the time, but he differentiated himself. It caught fire. But we're not seeing that. We're not seeing any great issue right now that people seem to be so upset about. Is it because of people weren't really paying attention? They were so confused by the ward system and how many wards there were going to be. It almost seemed like everybody was caught up in the mechanics of the election versus what the election was going to be about for a long time. I presume that your polling was done after the 25 ward system was in place.
Yeah, so the politicians were talking a lot about the mechanics because, of course, they're most interested.
Of course.
I'm not sure the public was super interested. They had some interest in it. They might not have liked the way Ford was doing it and everything, lack of consultation. But it's possible that it wasn't really the hottest topic. And it might have gotten more coverage just because it personally affected the councillors rather than the public directly. And so it might have stalled the campaign for a while. But you mentioned, John Tory's previous run when he was not successful. So I think he's going to be extremely careful, even though he's a front runner. He's lost in the past.
Absolutely.
And he's lost provincially too. So he's seen both.
You learn from those lessons.
You learn from that. You never forget that.
That's right. That's right.
So the back of his mind, he's going to leave no stone unturned. He's going to take nothing for granted. He's going to do nothing that would give Keesmaat any kind of benefit or advantage. So, the arguing over the debates and who's going to attend the debates. He's going to do nothing that's going to boost Keesmaat's profile unduly because he's not taking any chances at all. I believe that will be part of his strategy.
And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we see that in some of the announcements that Keesmaat's making. There's little or no response, frankly, from John Tory. He's staying the course. The Gardner Expressway is the perfect example. She's talked about this, that this was the worst decision they could have ever possibly made. And John's position, the mayor's position, is really, council made this decision, we have to move on. We already have a contract, and we'll take it from there, sort of steady as she goes. He doesn't want that,
No.
that sort of galvanizing issue, as you say. You're right. He's clearly learned from the past, and doesn't want one thing to sort of overtake the election. Is there anything else? I mean, there's lots to talk about, I know, from on a ward by ward basis, but you haven't been out in the field yet on those. When do you anticipate going out in terms of doing individual ward polling?
We had to wait for these boundaries to get settled.
Right.
We had to wait for councillors to decide where they're running and who's not running and all that stuff. So all that's now done. So now is a good time to start that type of polling.
Interesting. And so, we have this election coming up. What factor do you think, we talked a little bit about Doug Ford, what factor do you think that the Premier is going to play in this? I mean, if he gets involved, I mean, would he be able to swing this election one way or the other? Not necessarily the mayoralty, but candidates, do you believe that has an effect in terms of candidates ward by ward, if he supported certain candidates over others? The
Ford Nation is still there. It's always there. It was there from 4 years ago and even 4 years before that. So Ford Nation is there. It's about 30%. It is concentrated in those inner suburbs. So it is a potent force, I believe, out there.
Does that 30% necessarily go one way or the other? Is it a John Tory vote, or is that perhaps or is it that split between John Tory and Jennifer Keesmaat? Where does that Ford Nation sort of vote go?
Well,
we know it's on the right.
Yeah, it is on the right, so it will lean towards Tory. But in terms of those municipal races, and whether his endorsement would help, I think it would have some influence. But the thing about the ward races, that is like 99% name recognition. So it's really hard to get in, even if you get a Doug Ford endorsement. I know it happened the other day in Tobico, where he endorsed someone who's not one of the two sitting councillors.
Right.
It's still going to be hard, I believe, for that person to gain a lot of traction, because the name recognition, when you've got two sitting councillors running against each other in that ward, will be hard for the Ford factor to have much. The other thing about Doug Ford is, so his boundary, we haven't talked about the actual politics and public opinion on the whole idea of the boundaries. Was an unpopular idea in the end. People did buy the politician's argument, but it would be bad for the city. And so it was like a 60-40, approximately 60% in favor of keeping the old 47, or the new 47 wards versus 40% in the reduced wards that we ended up with. So
where does that split out? Was that an urban-suburban split again, or was that sort of across the city?
But that could be more of a left-right thing. Like it's hard to separate out the geography from the
ideology.
The ideology. But yeah, it was more popular in the suburbs than in the downtown area. And I think in the downtown area, people have a much closer relationship, because you're closer to your councillor. I mean, you're physically closer to them. You could actually go to their office. You can go to City Hall. Very hard for people in the inner suburbs to do that.
To come downtown.
To come downtown, they don't have that relationship, I don't believe, with their councillors.
Right.
I think the culture in the downtown area was more personal. Your councillor say, I have a problem with a pothole, and you call it, less so, I think, in the suburbs.
And there's also, I think, a lot more social issues that councillors are dealing with in the downtown core, perhaps. So they're touching perhaps more people than, than issues related to hard services that typically the councillors
And
in,
you have all the
in the
development
suburbs.
in the downtown area that generates a lot of interaction with residents.
Right.
So you have all that. So I think it's a different relationship. So people in the inner suburbs were kind of okay with the Ford idea of the reduction. People in the downtown area were not okay with that.
Interesting. And so now we have this 25 ward system. I mean, obviously, it remains to be seen which councillors are going to get elected where, and we'll be interested to see what your polling does. Will you be polling every ward in the city, or are you going to choose some key wards and key races to look at?
We're going to do what they call the cage matches.
Okay.
So these are where there's two incumbents running. Where there's only one incumbent running, and there are a few wards where that is the case, and there's a few wards where there are no incumbents running.
Right.
But it's really when you have two high-profile incumbents, then we'll want to know what really is going on with that. And that'll be harder to predict, because if it is really name recognition, it comes down to, well, in the larger ward, and, who has the larger portion of the newer combined ward?
Sure.
Because it's likely that they'll have a higher name recognition. And a lot of the councillors never really gain recognition outside their ward.
Beyond their boundary that they currently represent.
So they're kind of unknown. People may have heard of them, but not really like their own councillors.
Right.
So for the first time, we're going to have these really competitive races at the ward level because of this unique situation.
I fully agree. I mean, so we've talked a little bit about potentially Doug Ford getting involved and and endorsements, etc. So the mayor is running high in the polls. How does his endorsement? How do you believe his endorsement could have a factor? I mean, in some of these key races. First of all, is he likely to do that? But if he does he help candidates? Does that swing vote one way or the other?
Well, I don't know that he really will want to do much of that, because we've talked about how he's going to run a pretty safe campaign.
Right.
And if he starts promoting one candidate over another, he's going to know that person's supporters.
Right.
And one thing we know about them is those people are going to be voting. So they're voting not just for the council, they're also voting for mayor. So they're going to be there in the voting booth. So I don't know that he's going to want to get into a lot of battles on the local side.
That's interesting, because you would think in a 25 ward council, obviously he will need 13 votes to win any issue. Plus his own, obviously, but he'll need 13 votes to win any issue. So you would think that he will want to get involved, perhaps, to make sure he has that natural majority on council. And if he doesn't, someone gets elected without his help. They're not really beholden to him, let's say, or they don't owe him anything once they get elected. Do you think? I mean, is that a motivator? I mean, is that enough of a reason for him to get involved, or you think it's just he's going to play it safe because he's that concerned? When you're that far ahead, are you that concerned?
Well, it's still a while to go, and
okay.
so we have two weeks or whatever it is to go to election day. So that's still an eternity. So if he is going to do something, he may delay it for now, because he doesn't want something backfiring this far out. If he gets really confident, like it's getting really close, then he may look at the broader issue. If he thinks, oh yeah, I've got this in the bag, I'm really feeling really confident, so maybe it's the final week in the campaign, then he may think, okay, how do I get to 13 now? There's a bunch of councillors that are part of his 13 that are going to get elected anyways.
Of course.
So he doesn't have to get involved in that.
Of course.
And there's no reason to, because he would just be annoying his opponent's supporters in those wards. So he could look at some of the tight races, say, yeah, maybe I can push it over my way.
One way or the other.
One way or the other, with a few.
Right.
So if he's got 10 in the bag, he needs another 3, maybe he'll endorse 3.
But you believe that that's something that would happen sort of later on towards election day, where there's little risk if he's still that much ahead.
That's right.
Okay. So that'll be interesting to watch, and we look forward to you going in the field on those types of things. And frankly, at that point, we should get a better picture of what this council potentially could look like for the mayor if he's reelected, and where that urban suburban split happens. some people have said on a completely sort of different issue, you know, with this 25 ward council, some people have said that this makes it easier for political parties to start to evolve. You know, it was much more difficult when you had 44, let alone if they were going to go to 47. But at 25, like I said, the mayor would need 13 votes. You almost wonder if that's going to, you know, enable the ability of a political party, federal, provincial political party, to start to establish themselves municipally. It's always been resisted. Is that a possibility? Is that something that voters would potentially take to?
Well, the Liberals don't want to talk about this because they had such a disastrous situation right now.
Right.
Which is weird because, of course, Toronto is a Liberal leading city for the most part.
Right.
They didn't vote that way, obviously, in the last provincial election, but it is basically a red city. So, but they don't want to talk about it right now. So I think it's kind of a dead idea. Because the Liberals probably don't want to talk about it in any event.
But there are these third-party groups that have popped up. There's a group out there called Progress Toronto that are dedicated. They're a registered third party now. They can advertise. They can campaign against or for candidates. Do you think that will have an effect on these wards? Do people care about third party? I mean, we've talked about endorsements from the mayor, from the premier. Do they care about third party endorsements, what other people are saying when they go into a voting booth?
Only if it's really the right third party, like a famous third party. So most third parties aren't really cutting it in terms of, I think, public perception.
So you believe it's on more name recognition than potentially on issues?
Yes. So that's what's so important about this election, because whoever gets in now, they're in for decades because of the name recognition thing. So whoever, okay, so this is a
long time.
Yeah, it is a long time. So this is a major upheaval, and all the voting patterns are being broken because of the changing of the boundaries,
right?
And people running and not running and so forth. So this is critical because it really will determine, I think, for the next 20 years, really the nature of the city council, because now we have bigger wards and still the name recognition being a factor, unless we get party politics. So whoever gets in now, and there could be a lot of tight two-way races because of the two incumbents running, whoever pulls it off, they're in. Like, they are in. They're in a bigger area now where it'd be harder for a challenger to mount a challenge 4 years from now, and they have the name recognition.
Wow. So it's choose wisely. Because
Yeah,
this is the person that's going to represent you for a long time.
Absolutely, I believe so. That's been the history of incumbents. Like 90% of incumbents in the city of Toronto get reelected.
Wow, wow. So, and because it's name recognition and there's no party affiliation to come and go as you see in other levels of the government. Well, that's interesting, and so you know we look forward to your polling, and I'd love to have you back when you've done that, and we can talk about some of these cage matches as you described. That's fascinating. That'll be fascinating to see what the results are and see where that goes. And so I think for now we're going to say goodbye and thank you, Lorne Bozinoff, President of Forum Research, for coming in and talking about this. Your insights are always welcome, and thank you for joining us. And we hope this was informative to the viewers, and we look forward to doing this again in a little while. We do have another guest coming on in a week or so, Adrienne Batra, who is the editor of the Toronto Sun. She'll give a political perspective just prior to the election, but perhaps we'll get Lorne in and around that time to talk about those ward by wards and go from there and get you some more election insight and coverage. Thank you very much, and have a great day. Thank you, Lorne.
Thank you.